Hi, I'm Krista Arthur, and welcome to the Consilien Report. We continue with our series on navigating what comes next by talking to WGH Managing Partner, Richard Golubow. Richard is a bankruptcy specialist who specializes in keeping businesses out of bankruptcy court. In today's interview, he talks about what you need to do to stay out of bankruptcy, how to plan instead of panic. And then he also talks about an interesting change to the bankruptcy law that came about as part of the CARE Act. So stay tuned. I think you're really going to find this informative and hopeful. Hi, Richard.
Hi.
I'm so glad that you could be here for
Thanks
our
for having
continuing
me.
series. Yeah. So we're going to be talking about bankruptcy, which can be a grim topic, but it doesn't have to be. It can be strategic. It can be smart. It can be the right thing to do for your business.
Does not necessarily mean a liquidation.
Oh, there you go.
It's a restructuring.
Okay.
And that's what we do. We do a lot of restructuring. We do so out of court, and then we do so in court. And an in-court restructuring is typically going to be a bankruptcy in the context of a Chapter 11 pending in a federal bankruptcy court.
Yes. So let's talk about your experience.
I've been in private practice since January of '94. So started my clerkship in '92, ended the beginning of '94. Before that, I worked in the fashion industry before I went to law school. So I feel as though I have pretty good understanding of what business owners go through because of the fact that I was put in a management position where I was in effect running a division at a very young age of a costume jewelry company that serviced Target and Braun stores. So yeah, we did a substantial amount of business, and my role was to go ahead and develop product and then to look to sell it to mass retailers. So I dealt with a lot of business issues before going to law school.
Yeah.
And I feel as though it gives me a unique perspective because of the fact that when I'm talking to a client, I'm not talking to a client solely in my capacity as a lawyer, but also as someone that was in an industry other than the legal profession. And then, of course, I've been managing my law firm for a good part of the last 25 plus years. So anyway, but the way that I got into bankruptcy was when I was coming out of law school, I thought I was going to be a real estate transactional attorney. And in the early 90s, that market had dried up. So I had taken all these classes that were prerequisites for bankruptcy, took a bankruptcy class, loved it. And I was strongly encouraged to do an internship with a bankruptcy judge, and I did. And during that internship, that judge offered me a position to be his full-time law clerk when I graduated from law school.
That's great. Yeah. So deep roots in the business community, deep roots in this subject matter. And I think now it's the perfect time to talk to you with everything that's going on with the pandemic. What have you been seeing with your clients? What are they asking you about right now?
So I could tell you that my clients are exasperated, and they are so because of the fact that unlike in your traditional, when I say traditional, leading up to this pandemic, we were dealing primarily with microeconomic issues where clients had their own specific problems. Sometimes they were driven by macroeconomic issues, but they were primarily just companies that were mismanaged, or there may have just been a problem in collecting on an outstanding obligation for a major customer, things of that sort. But with respect to the pandemic, people are just flat out panicked because of the fact that they're not in control and they're getting hit with so much information, and it's so difficult to really read it, digest it, understand it. And then yet again, the very next day, there's new information that's coming out. And sometimes it contradicts the information that they just read and thought that they had a good handle on the day before. So I really feel as though people are scrambling because they don't really know what to do. And how do you deal with a business and try to restructure a business or get a really good handle on your business when people are not conducting business? You can't easily conduct business. and you're not really sure how your business is going to be impacted, whether it's through supply chain problems or whether it's downstream to your customers where you're doing everything that you are contracted to do, but meanwhile your customer doesn't have the financial resources to pay you. So
So how are you helping them with that exasperation and kind of weeding through what they shouldn't be doing?
So I would say that if I needed to summarize it in just a few words, that I'm telling my clients to plan, not panic, to really have a good handle and understanding of their operational expenses, to really have a good understanding of all of their financial obligations, and to start to go through contracts, lease agreements, just take a look at the business from head to toe to see what it is that needs to be cut, what needs to be restructured, scaled back. It's really about conducting a full-on diagnostic of the business, because of the fact that there's not an expense that that should not be closely looked at to see whether or not it's really necessary now or on a go-forward basis. And at the same time, really needing to understand what their sources of revenue are going to be in the near term and in the long term. So it's really about just sitting down and getting them to focus in on their business and not to make any rash decisions.
Right.
So that's the other thing too, is that people, I have a client that many years ago, very, very wise statement. And what that client said to me was, as people get older, they really don't like ambiguity.
Right.
So what winds up happening is you're dealing with seasoned, entrepreneurs who are older. And as a result, they don't like ambiguity. So they want to know, they want a definitive path. We help them in getting them to focus in on their business. But we can't necessarily tell them exactly how to act yet, because simply there's too many other variables that they're not in control of. And people are starting or trying to get a grasp on what are the true effects of COVID-19. When is business going to be open again? And when it does open, is it opening just in our state? Is it opening nationally? What about international businesses? So there's so many different variables that we need to just talk about, but it's all about getting the clients to be really calm and to just sit down and be reflective. And I think that what winds up happening in our world is everyone is so busy, but many times they're so busy that they don't engage in reflective thought. Now's the time to really take a look at your business at a very, very granular level and say, okay, when we come out of this, what do we want to do differently? What do we need to do differently?
Right.
So, so that's what we're really looking to do with our clients, is sit down and help them in restructuring their business, but to position them or reposition them for profitability and eventual growth.
That's a great insight, to plan and not panic, to really stay focused on what's necessary now, what they have to do now. And it really sounds like you're working in a consultative position, not just helping them to get ready for a bankruptcy. So how many of your clients that come to see you, how many of the clients that come to see you actually need to file Chapter 11?
So I don't keep percentages, but I would say it's a fairly low percentage, that it's probably going to be less than 20%. And that's because what winds up happening is invariably a client is having problems, just they're having financial difficulty. And many times they'll contact me and say, I think I need to file for bankruptcy. And I'll get them to pause and I'll say, well, what makes you think that? And then they start to describe these problems that they're having. But my response is typically, well, couldn't we look to just negotiate out of court and look to consensually resolve outstanding issues that you may have with creditors? To the extent that you're running into a cash flow problem, Can't we look to refinance? Can't we look to borrow additional money? Can't we look to get better credit terms? Can't we look to get perhaps an agreement from vendors where we're going to make a lump sum payment, albeit at a discount? So I really want to get them focused in on understanding bankruptcy. We consider the last option, the option of last resort, the nuclear option. It's when you have no other choice, because filing a bankruptcy, Chapter 11, it's expensive.
Yeah.
And what winds up happening is your books and records are a matter of public record. Not everyone wants to open up their books and records so easily, especially since what a lot of people don't necessarily realize before they file for bankruptcy is that they may, by opening up their books and records, expose themselves to a hostile takeover because of the fact that they may be in an industry where they're weak, but they have one or more competitors that aren't weak.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, those competitors gather support from creditors in the debtor case. And what they look to do is they look to propose a competing Chapter 11 plan or do something in some way, shape, or form where ultimately they're going to try to control or take over control of the debtor company.
Right.
So we really look to bankruptcy as our backstop. What can we do in a bankruptcy? Because when we're dealing with creditors, we always want to know what the bankruptcy code provides. So the hope, the thought, the plan, the whole process is all driven by trying to consensually negotiate or resolve outstanding issues, whether it's creditor claims, whether it's litigation, whatever it happens to be. And then failing that, then we start to look at bankruptcy or some other more extreme bankruptcy alternatives. When I say extreme, it would be something other than an out-of-court workout. There could be a liquidation or some other bankruptcy alternative that we would start to investigate.
So they should probably, if people are thinking along those lines or they're just uncertain, they should probably call you or another attorney now so they can start planning, and maybe not planning for bankruptcy, but like we talked before, going through their finances and starting to create a plan instead of just assuming that this is the end of the business. Is that? Yeah. So you said when we were talking before that there's been a change to the bankruptcy law because of everything that's going on.
Yes. So what happened was in February 19th of 2020, there was an amendment to the bankruptcy code. That amendment provided for a small business reorganization where if debtors have debts that are $2.7 million or less, then they can avail themselves to a streamlined section of Chapter 11 of the Bankruptcy Code. And then what wound up happening was the CARES Act modified those newly implemented amendments to the code by increasing the debt limit from 2.7 million to 7.5 million. So it's nearly triple the amount of debt that a debtor can carry and still be eligible for the streamlined Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And I understand that the CARES Act was, with respect to this amendment, that amendment is in place only for 1 year.
Okay.
So to the extent that someone is thinking about filing a bankruptcy, they were interested in utilizing the streamlined process, they would have a year after the CARES Act. And of course, that is assuming that their debt exceeds $2.7 million.
Right.
Because for right now, it's $7.5 million. Now, my thought is that there is a very good chance that Congress will be lobbied to keep the $7.5 million debt limitation in place on a go-forward basis and make that permanent. As a matter of fact, there were nationally recognized bankruptcy experts, and I believe it was through the American Bankruptcy Institute, where they were requesting that the debt limitation be $10 million for these small business reorganizations. And Congress ultimately decided on $2.7 million. So the $7.5 million is a lot closer to the $10 million that the ABI was suggesting. And that is a much better number anyway, because it would allow for so many companies that otherwise would just get swallowed by enormous administrative fees and expenses in a Chapter 11.
Mm-hmm.
So what it does is it creates an option, and I believe more bargaining and leverage for the debtor company by just knowing that they can go into a bankruptcy. They don't need to spend that much money in comparison to your full-blown Chapter 11, and they can accomplish a goal that they may not, or goals that they may not be able to otherwise accomplish in a consensual out-of-court restructuring.
Richard, do you have any information about that on your website, or should people just call you directly to discuss?
People should just call me to discuss.
Okay.
That would be, the best way to handle it, because I do have an internal document that I've drafted that goes over the benefits of moving forward with what we're referring to as subchapter 5, Chapter 11, and the 5 is represented by a Roman numeral V. So, but it would be best for them to call, especially since the call would generate a conversation, and that's really what it is that we want. We want to have a conversation.
Yeah, and what I like about our conversation is it's creating a safe place for business owners or CFOs to actually have a conversation with you, and that the ultimate goal isn't to get them into bankruptcy court, but to keep them out of bankruptcy, so that they can restructure their business and plan for a post-pandemic future. So I think that's fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah, love it. Love it. So how can people get in touch with you?
So 2 ways. First would be they could call me on my direct dial. So although we are sheltered in place, I do have my office phone in my home office. That number is 949-720-4135. Alternatively, they could email me, and the email address, I'll say it and then I'll spell it. It's rgolubow@wghLawyers.com. So spelled RGOLUBOW at WGHLawyers with an S on the end.com.
We'll put it, or I'll put it in the comments and on the screen so everyone can see it.
Great.
Well, terrific. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you very much.